Jim Jarmusch not only introduced Roberto Benigni to the English-speaking world, he also introduced us to what we think of now as independent film. He's worked with artists from Neil Young to Forest Whitaker. We'll find out exactly how he works on the next Independent Focus.
We knew we had to do a kind of a cheap movie. We had certain restrictions. It had to be
very personal and a very small crew, and it took 5 years.
Good Bad Taste always makes you laugh in a different way and has some wit involved.
He was making a very different film than One on One.
The head of the studio called me up and started screaming at me.
Every edit is a political act.
Filmmaking 101. Don't talk about it, show it.
Let me ask you about writing for actors. Do you have people in mind when you start to write a movie, or do you go to the actor first?
Well, I do things backwards. I've almost always written with the main character's cast in my head, and I have been lucky to trick them into being in the film after I've written the script. So I do talk to them in advance and tell them the idea for the story, and then I'm using them as, you know, I'm imagining them as the character and hoping that I'm writing it for them and see what happens. But I've been lucky they've agreed to do it.
Is that how it happened with Stranger in Paradise?
That was written for, you know, with the actors in mind, certainly. All the films have been done that way for the main actors. Ghost Dog, I wrote specifically for Forest Whitaker and Isaac de Bancale, who plays Raymond, the ice cream guy. The other actors were cast after the script was done.
It's interesting, too, though, because there's a real sort of sense of loners in your movies, or obviously outcasts.
Well, since I was a teenager, I don't know why, but I always have been attracted to things that were not mainstream. So when I was young, like this friend of mine, his older brother, I grew up in Akron, Ohio, and this one friend of mine, when his older brother wasn't home, we'd go in his room and find, like, you know, books by William Burroughs and records by Ornette Coleman or The Mothers of Invention, and our first reaction was, wow, this stuff's not from Akron, you know? So, and I don't know, I'm just more, those things speak to me, it's very subjective, it's just personal taste, but I'm more attracted to things that I guess are more in the margins.
When you made Stranger in Paradise, that you had basically fathered in what we think of as being independent film now and still being looked upon as kind of a, you know, an exemplar of that and people following your example.
Well, I don't understand that really because, you know, I got inspired by John Cassavetes or films by Robert Frank or films by Sam Fuller that, although made in the studio system, were definitely like relegated to like a B movie budget and category. So I don't know, to me it's an ongoing, you know, there are people who make films because they love the form of cinema and they want to use it as an expression. And there are people who make films that they want to make money off of and sort of reach the largest possible audience. And so their concerns are more on the business side. And I don't think one is better than the other. Me personally, I'm drawn more toward what I guess used to be called independent or a more European style of working. But, you know, it sure didn't start with me, that, you know.
Well, Down by Law, how long did it take to put that together and how did it come together for you?
I was writing, I had a very vague idea for John Lurie and Tom Waits that they were going to be in jail together and hate each other and escape together. But that was as far as the idea went. And then I went to Italy to a small film festival where I was on the jury of the film festival. And also in this jury was this Italian guy, Roberto Benigni, who I'd never heard of. And we became instant friends. We were the two guys out in the alley smoking cigarettes when we were supposed to be watching the films. When the director of the festival, of course, would walk down that alley, "Well, what are you doing here? Yeah, get in there." So, and Roberto spoke no English, and I spoke no Italian, so we spoke broken French for days. And we just jabbered away like idiots about everything, about philosophy and books we'd read and films we'd seen, and you know, and this guy was so amazing to me that I went to Rome right after that, and in about a week I wrote a treatment for Down by Law and gave it to Roberto. before I had to go back to the States, and he said he wanted to, he'd like to do this story with me. So I went back, wrote a script, and a lot of the ideas came just from being around Roberto. So somehow I got a real rush of energy and wrote, basically the whole story of Down by Law in about 5 days. And then went back and wrote a script with dialogue and whatever.
Have you ever been offered a studio film?
Yeah, I used to get offered them quite a lot, less and less. In fact, nothing recently. But I started to suspect the kind of things they offered me was so different than anything I had made. It was around Stranger, Down by Law. I think they just maybe, analyze. They had a computer that told you how many times someone's name appeared in Variety, so they put that on a list and send them a script. I don't know. But they were films like, really like bad teenage coming of age kind of, almost like Porky's 5 kind of thing. And I was like, but didn't they see my film? Well, why are they sending me this? I don't know. So a few were, were a little more interesting than that, but.
But you never got interested enough to make them, or what happened?
No, it's not my style. I mean, I don't want to make a film with people, the money people, deciding the artistic elements of the film. So I would be really bad at that. I would probably make a really bad film, and I'd end up in jail, probably. So it's not my way, and I know that about myself. So it's like, why should a guy that used to run an underwear factory and is wearing a $2,000 suit be telling me who to cast in the film and how to cut it, and I don't get that.
Night on Earth is like you go from one set of Outcasts to another around the planet. And I also wonder too how that idea came to you, because I wonder if you had just been sort of scribbling things with that general theme about following one night, or if there were 4 or 5 different pictures you wanted to make, and you decided it'd be easier to collapse all the stories, or how that happened.
Oh man, I had another project that I had spent about 1.5 years trying to get together, and I don't want to go into it, but it fell through, and it was really frustrating for me. So I got really depressed, and I was like, I don't know. I remember not leaving my house for like a couple weeks, and Tom Waits called me up and said, well, what are you doing? And I told him what had happened, and he said, well, come on, man, just write something else right away. So, don't still moping around, that's not going to get you anywhere, just write something else. So I wrote Night on Earth literally in 8 days, and I wrote it for specific actors, some of whom were friends of mine that I wanted to see. So I thought, well, this is a way we'll get to work together, and like Isaac de Bancolet and Roberto and the Finnish actors.
So what's it like then to make a concert movie, which actually is about music?
Well, I only did that once. That was really great for me because I was in the middle of moving my office physically to a new place and having all new people work with me. And I had so much business stuff to attend to that I would not have made another film in that period, except that Neil Young called up and said, hey, let's make a film, we're going on the road. And I said, well, how long a film do you mean? And he said, hey man, when I start writing a song, I don't think about how long it's going to be, we'll just start filming it and see what happens.
You said you weren't even sure there's a movie in it. As you're cutting it together, though, what kind of life does a concert movie take on? Because there's got to be its own kind of drama in a way, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't know what Year of the Horse is. It's sort of half a concert movie, half a documentary. So it sort of just is what it is based on what footage we had. But, we were very attentive as to how we were shooting the concert footage, because mostly it was me and Larry Johnson, who produced the film. We were on stage with Super 8 cameras, and most of the footage is from our camera work. So it was really raw, and we wanted that kind of raw look because we thought that was appropriate to the sound of the band, which is raw, and yet there's something beautiful and slightly damaged about their sound. So we tried to, approximate that with a visual look. So, we were pretty careful about that.
Had you seen Rust Never Sleeps beforehand?
I had, yes.
And did you kind of use that as an object lesson as what you didn't want to do?
Not completely, but we really wanted to do, make our own film. And I like that film, but I think Year of the Horse has a very different feel.
Yeah, it really does have a very different feel.
More gritty feel, maybe.
Yeah, more handheld too, obviously. I mean, clearly, for you, the music has to have its own organic life, doesn't it? I mean, it has to basically live in a way that's both a part of the film and stand on its own.
Well, it has to exist. It has to be woven into the fabric of the film. They're not separate things. They get married, and hopefully they don't get divorced before the film's released. So it's very, it's very important to me. Unless you're making a silent film, sound is half of your film. So I'm very attentive, not just to the music, but to all sounds in the film and the way the film is mixed and the sound is prepared. I mean, I sometimes drive people crazy that I work with. Like in Ghost Dog, he sees a woodpecker, and the sound, Chick Ciccolini, our sound designer, who's really excellent, he put in the sound of a hairy woodpecker. And I said, no, that's a pileated woodpecker. And this Chick Ciccolini's like a real New York guy. He's like, what are you talking about? It's a hairy woodpecker, pileated woodpecker, it's a woodpecker. I was like, no, you got to get the right woodpecker. So he's, all right, I get it, he got it. So, it has to be accurate, and the sound mix is really, really important to me. It's as important as the photography.
What's a big part of this movie too was the cartoons. I mean, there's Felix the Cat, there's Betty Boop, there's some of the Fleischer Studio stuff, there's the Simpsons stuff, all of which corresponds to what's going on in the movie. But how did you end up coming up with that stuff?
Well, it's a long story. I mean, I love cartoons. I'm a big fan of like Tex Avery, for example. So I had all these cartoons I wanted to use, and Tex Avery, Warner Brothers, Hanna-Barbera, they all said, and these were very violent cartoon clips, right? And they said, well, we don't license any of our cartoon clips to movies that have any violence in them. So then Stacy Smith, who I work with, said, well, listen, I'm going to find out people that would license cartoons to us, and then we'll go through all these cartoons and try to find things that relate to the film. So she helped focus in on things that I could get access to, and then while shooting, I would spend my one day off watching 8 hours of cartoons, which was probably a good thing, actually. And we found a lot of things that worked well in the film, I think.
Well, the Fleischer stuff, it's just so beautiful to watch. I mean, it really is cinematic.
Big fan of the Fleischer brothers. They used to do interesting things like they would try to get around the code, the censorship code, by sneaking things in, like in the old Popeye cartoons. I think some still exist when Popeye's like mumbling. Sometimes there's very obscene things he's saying. Oh wait, we're on TV, right? We can't see.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. But yeah, I love those Fleischer brothers.
Well, one of the more interesting things in the movie is watching Cliff Gorman do a little bit of Public Enemy. I mean, how does a scene like that come into your head?
Well, I read an article like maybe 10 years ago in I think the New York Daily News, when a lot of the Gambino crime family were locked up in Rikers Island, and it said what they wanted from the outside most was hardcore gangster rap tapes. Seriously. And I thought, well, that's pretty weird, And then I thought more about it, and there's so many references in hip-hop to gangster comes from gangsters, and there's so many references to the mafia that it only made sense in a way that they would cross-reference each other. So that stayed in my head, and then while I was writing, I wanted to have one of these guys be a hip-hop fan, although his tastes are about 10 years behind, but still, the good stuff stays good, so,
But it's interesting when you mention that. I mean, there's a real sort of melange, because there's also the rap influence with Asian culture and Hong Kong movies, which the Wu-Tang Clan and RZA kind of embody, don't they?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not a sociologist or anything, but I think that comes from starting in the 60s when most like ghetto theaters were booked with martial arts films. And those audiences have, you know, they're very intelligent audiences. They look deeper and look, I think Eastern culture has filtered back, like people like RZA and Wu-Tang. You know, they've really looked into that, study that stuff. They study with a Shaolin monk in New York, Sifu Yanming, who's actually in Ghost Dog. There's a brief scene where you see him do a couple kung fu moves on a guy. That's, yeah, and that's the master, Sifu Yanming, who's a Shaolin monk.
But there's also this really sort of weird, interesting sense of family in those kung fu movies, and you can see that's clearly played a part too. I mean, I grew up seeing those in theaters in Detroit, and I know guys really got off on seeing that kind of stuff, the banding together.
Yeah, for identity and for survival and to have a code. And I find one thing I really love about Wu-Tang is, unlike a lot of pop musicians and rap stars who sort of want to keep it all for themselves and become big and be the star, the Wu-Tang wants to spread, you know, their philosophy, their ideas. So if they're young, talented people in Staten Island or wherever that they know, they bring them on board. It's like they want the Wu-Tang to expand. And that comes too from that kind of ideology that you get in martial arts films.
It's almost musical, the pauses in the movies. I thought about that, you talked about that. It seems very much like Ornette Coleman to me, where there's a kind of trust that sort of takes place where we're waiting to hear what the actors are going to say instead of forcing an artificial chatter in the room.
Yeah, I mean, people don't speak on cue, and in normal conversations there are pauses where people collect their thoughts or drift off, or, you know, it's just like what I'm doing now, just drifting off. But, you know, I'm also not a big fan of, I think you call out here in Los Angeles, you call them power cuts. You know, where they want the scene to end and boom, cut to the next, you know.
Or the smash cut, they use that too.
Yeah, whatever it is, I don't like it. I like things to flow. I mean, films are very closely related to music because they have their own rhythm, their own time. They pass before you at their own flow. It's not like reading a book or looking at a painting where you choose how long you look at a certain thing or read something over again. They take you with them, and that's musicality. So they're connected, they're related.
This always struck me as being really intriguing because now we talk about it and I hear these pauses, it really does sound like music to me. And I got to think that somehow each movie feels like it's a different kind of music that you're composing.
I hope so, you know, I hope so. And they grow out of, it's sort of an organic thing. They just grow out of certain ideas and they progress as we go along, and the rhythm is in the way people speak, the way the film's photographed, and certainly the way it's edited. So you find that rhythm as you go along. And it's very hard to, like, when people question you about what does it mean, why did you do this, what are you trying to say? And, you know, what you're trying to say is on the screen, and then to have to explain it in words is not my forte. So it gets a little frustrating for me.
So you feel like basically the movie, if it doesn't say it, then people are missing the point of the movie, or what?
People think that everything on the screen that you planned and you understand the meaning of everything, and you don't always. Like, people ask me about Ghost Dog, what is the meaning of the dog that recurs in the film? And honestly, I have no idea, you know? He's a dog, he's out there, he's you know, he sees Ghost Dog. Get it? Ghost Dog, dog, I don't know. I mean, Ghost Dog, you know, he has connection to animals. He has respect for animal spirits. That's another creature that seems to be dog in him, you know, so
I think my favorite scene in the movie is when he and his friend are watching the guy build a boat on the roof. That's really amazing.
Well, I'm glad you say that. If I had made this film for a studio, that's probably the first thing they would chop right out of there, you know? Like, what the hell does that have to do with anything? But I'm glad you say that, because I like the fact that that scene is, there are three people there that all have very strange kind of personal dreams that they are trying to fulfill in their lives, and they're all kind of odd characters, and none of them are speaking the same language, and yet they all understand that dream. And no matter what the rest of the world thinks, that's not pertinent to them. They have their own dreams, and they're going to follow them.
But also in some weird way, they all seem to be kind of the same guy. I mean, they all have this kind of the same understanding of this thing and of the world, even though they have no language in common.
Yeah. That's actually something, though, that friends of mine saw on the Lower East Side in New York. They saw a guy building a big boat on the roof of a tenement building like 10 years ago, and they told me about it. And they all of us almost in unison said, how the hell's the guy going to get it down from there? You know? So that stayed with me and ended up in the film.
When you hear about things like that, or ideas strike you, do you keep journals? Do you sort of like start to write a script and put it aside to go back to it? How do you keep all this stuff in your head and organized?
Well, I either collect it in my head or in notebooks with a lot of disparate little ideas that I have no idea. You know, I don't know where they're going to go or how I'm going to use them, but they interest me, and then sometimes they pop up in something. Sometimes they haven't yet, you know.
And how much room is there for improvisation in a movie like that?
Well, it's really particular. It depends on each actor. Like, I had the great experience of working with Nicholas Ray when I was a film student, and I was his teaching assistant. And he told me, you know, anyone that tells you that there's one way for all directors to direct all actors is an idiot. There's only one way for any director to direct any actor, and you have to find that way together. Like, he drove from the West Coast to the East Coast with James Dean before shooting Rebel Without a Cause, not to talk about the film, but to get to know each other so he could figure out how to best collaborate with James Dean. So, you know, how much improvisation is really based on what an actor's strengths are and what our relationship is collaborating together. Like, some actors you give a very long leash to, you know, and other actors, they like to be closer to the map, closer to what you wrote. And it really varies on each actor. Like, I had actors in Dead Man, Robert Mitchum does not improvise. And then I worked with a lot of great actors in that film. Michael Wincott was one who I would let improvise almost every scene. Sometimes I'd tell him just a basic idea, and he'd say, how about if I... And I'd say, no, don't tell me now, let's roll. And I'd just let him go, and he was brilliant that way. So it really is different. Roberto, working with him, you give him a long leash, but you gotta wheel him back, you know, reel him back in a little, because he'll just keep going, like, you know. You got to pull him back. And I got to work with John Hurt just in a small role in Dead Man, and I love that. What a great actor. And you'll give him, you know, you put a line on him, and he'll run as far away as he can, but he'll show you the whole gamut of the possibilities of that character. And he wants you to reel him back to the point where you feel is appropriate. He does that to you to show you it could be any of these things, you know, and then you try to find the one that you feel is most appropriate, and you tell him that, and he wants to know that, and then you collaborate from there. So it's very different with each actor.
Okay, let's take the first question.
Quick question about exactly what steps you take to visualize a script. I mean, I see that you have a long-standing collaboration with Robbie Mueller, and you've worked with some other people in the past as well. What are the steps that you take to to adapt a screenplay to the screen?
Well, we talk a lot about what the script is about, what the character is about, what the feeling of the film is. We try to get to the soul of the film and work from the inside out. So we start talking about those things first, atmospheric things that will reflect the soul of the story. And then we move gradually toward looking at locations, talking about color, eventually talking about specifically lighting and film material, and then setting up shots together. But it's hard to explain because it is a kind of organic process that grows, and you keep working on it. I never use a storyboard, and I try not to use shot lists which drives the production people insane, you
Did you
know?
ever do that? Did you ever have like storyboards or shot lists at all?
Shot lists I have used, but you throw them away when you get to the set because you'll look at a location with the DP and it will be, you know, 10 a.m. on a Monday, and then you'll be shooting there a month later and it's like 4 in the afternoon and the light's coming from a different place, or, you know, things change, so you have to think on your feet and adapt. So the shot list is a good starting point for structuring the scene and you know, your ideas about where cuts will be or how you want to cover it. But you have to, for me, it's important to be free and able to throw that away and rethink it as you go. So the shot list is a kind of security thing that you have for, you know, like, well, we did think about it, but now we're going to change it, you know?
Let's thank Jim Jarmusch.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Elvis Mitchell's Wardrobe, provided by Oliver.